Good morning. How's everybody doing? You realize we are 1/3 of the way done with the semester? All right. Who's counting? Anyway, any questions about anything so far? We're in a bit of a lull, aren't we? We have lab exams coming up, though. Okay. So make sure you're prepared for that. Look for any lab review that's running. I'm running it this Thursday. It's may change, semester to semester, but this semester it's going to be this coming Thursday. I'll stay in there from 11 until 12:30 because I know some people have class until noon. Okay, so I will stay in there. All right. And then before you know it, we'll be up to our next lecture exam. Okay. So, do you guys have a question?
She just asked me if I was going to lab review.
Oh, okay. Well, are you?
Yeah, probably.
Okay, good. Okay, to know. As people who have had me before know, and I'll inform new people, I don't sit and just go through stuff. I expect you to come in with questions, and then we'll actually create like a fake exam after we review, which is always pretty fun, isn't it? I think that's been helpful, guys, hasn't it? I would say yes anyway. But anyway, I think it is. Okay, so 11 to 12:30 this coming Thursday. Okay. All right, let's move on if there's no other questions. So we're going to start talking about endocrine. Okay, who has studied the endocrine system before? Okay, nobody. That's why I'm here, right? Now, endocrine is very complicated. Endocrine is a series of glands that release what? Hormones. Okay? They're ductless. Remember we talked about endocrine versus exocrine way back in tissues? Okay? They are ductless. How they release their hormones is they have a network of capillaries, and capillaries are the smallest blood vessels networked around them. They'll release their hormones, and guess where those hormones go? Into the capillaries, which is the bloodstream, and then out to our body. At that point, how does a specific hormone know when it's reached its specific target gland or structure? Beautiful, receptors. So, suppose we're talking about growth hormone, which makes bones and muscles grow. There are specific receptors that accept growth hormone on those bones and muscles. Are you with me with that? Okay. Follicle stimulating hormone creates our follicles, our sperm and our eggs. It will only go to our genital region, right? It's not going to attach to our thyroid and stimulate it. So, hormone is very specific to a specific structure. We know because there are specific receptors. Okay? Where it gets complicated is what's coming from where and how it's triggered and then how it's turned off. Okay? So, and it's very disconnected. It's not like cardiovascular where I say there's arteries that lead to capillaries that lead to veins, they come back to the heart. It's not that linear. It's like, here's a gland, here's what it does. Here's a gland, this is how it gets stimulated, this is what it does. It's really just memorizing stuff. Okay? So, let's get into it. Endocrine system, how about those glands? Hormones are chemical messengers. I'm going to talk about their structures in a little bit. Okay? Now, they help with a multitude of things, which is another reason why endocrine is so confusing, because it's not just one thing that these glands send a message out and do. It does this, it does that, it does this, it does that. Okay, it gets a little wackadoo. Okay? Endocrine versus exocrine, I just spoke about briefly. Endocrine does not have a what? Duct. Exocrine does. Can you give me an example of what exocrine glands might do or secrete? Sweat, tears, right? A little bit of mucus in our spit, things like that, okay? Those are completely separate from the endocrine system. Endocrine system will release hormones. Some cells can produce hormones too. For example, prostaglandins can be released from cells locally, which can trigger, say, an inflammatory response. That would be released from one little cell. Outside of that cell, it would trigger white blood cells to come to it and create that kind of a response. And there are several of them. They're called paracrines. I don't think I get into them here. I'll see it in the next slide. Okay, so in addition to this network of glands that secrete specific hormones to go to specific receptors, cells can also secrete hormones as well. Okay? I don't think I get into it much in the E&P. Oh, I do, a little bit there. Okay? You know, when we're pardon me, talking about hormones, they can be amino acid based, which means they create what type of structure? If we link like 50 to thousands of amino acids in a chain, we create a protein. Okay, so we have amino acid based hormones, and we also have steroid based hormones, which is from fats. It's important to know the difference as to how they permeate the cell or don't permeate the cell. I'll talk about that in the next slide or two, okay? And you understand steroid is a fat, right? Remember learning about that? Did we learn about that yet? Well, actually, no, we have metabolism coming up, which we will learn that in. But I'll tell you right now, it's a fat, okay? Amino acids, I know we talked about, all right? So we have amino acid based, we have steroid based, which is fat based, okay? Now, eicosanoids are local hormones from individual cells. You can say paracrines as well. We'll go with this because it's in the notes, it's fine, okay? So that little cell gets irritated or like for example, cells in the respiratory system can release leukotrienes. Leukotrienes can trigger the inflammatory response. Now, I'm asthmatic. I release excess leukotrienes. We don't know why. Well, we do know I'm allergic to things. That sets off an allergic reaction in my respiratory tract. My cells in my lungs, right, and my bronchioles more specifically release leukotrienes. Leukotrienes are a pro-inflammatory hormone. I get inflammation there. But is it a normal amount of inflammation that I get into my bronchioles if I'm asthmatic? No, I have an overproduction. So what does that do to my airways? Does it keep them nice and open so I can breathe well as an asthmatic? Right, they spasm down. If we can stop the release of the local cells releasing those leukotrienes, we can relax that muscle, decrease the inflammation, and I can breathe better. There's specific singular, did you ever hear that? Okay, is a medicine that does that, okay? Prostaglandins, there's tons of prostaglandins that I'm not gonna get into them. But know that they are locally released hormones from cells that can trigger immune responses. It can actually stop immune responses too. That's why I'm saying we're not going to get much into it. There's a whole bunch of them that do different things. Can also help with childbirth, can help with muscle spasms. There's a lot of stuff that prostaglandins can do. And if you go into cell bio or even maybe medical genetics, I think you'll probably learn about those. Okay, definitely pharmacology, because you'll have responses to that. Okay, so eicosanoids are those locally released hormones that are released from cells. Okay. So are those going to act on a systemic level? When I release leukotrienes from my lungs, do you think that they're going to go out into my system and affect a whole bunch of different areas? They're locally affecting. Locally released, locally affecting. And it can actually affect the cell itself or the cells around it. Are you with me? It's just a local response. Okay? Are we good with that? All right. Beyond that, we're really going to focus on more the systemic hormones. Okay? Look at me. So I went over that first sentence, right? Now, amino acid based hormones bind to the cell membranes and send messages to the cell by what are called second messengers. Okay, so just a very quick picture. So if I have an amino acid based hormone and it comes in, it can't get through that cell membrane. Does anybody remember why? What is the membrane made up of? I think you just said it. I can't hear you though.
Is it like a double layer of lipid? Or?
Double layer of lipids, right?
Yeah.
So protein can't permeate through the lipids because it's not protein soluble. It's going to be what? Lipid soluble, right? So does everybody understand what lipid soluble means? It means that the fat can pass through it or break it apart. Not break it apart, pass through it. Okay? So amino acids can't get through that cell membrane. What they will do, and this is very complicated. Who's gone over these? G protein? No? Cell bio? No? Doesn't ring a bell? Yeah? Okay. So amino acids will attach to receptors on the cell, and we're just going to keep it really simple. And they're going to stimulate a second messenger. Okay, this is a second messenger. Okay? That second messenger is going to go through a whole cascade of steps, which we're not going to get into at this point. All right? And send messages to the nucleus. What do you think the end game is? Why do you think that we want to send a message to the nucleus? Actually, let me finish the other thought. So steroids are lipid soluble. They can pass through the lipid, phospholipid bilayer. Remember that fancy schmancy word, right? And they can come in and directly go to the nucleus. So the goal is to get signals to the nucleus. Okay, amino acids have to send a messenger. Steroid-based hormones can pass right through. What's the end game? What do you think they're doing at the nucleus? So the nucleus has what in it? A lot of DNA, right? All of our DNA, right? In addition to having our genetic code, what does DNA do? It creates, remember we talked about it, it separates, no? RNA? Yeah. RNA helps this to happen. DNA talks to RNA, and RNA makes what? Proteins. That's the end game, guys. These hormones will come in. Their goal is to get a message to the nucleus to make more proteins from that cell. More bone, more muscle cells, help to create new eggs and sperm. Are you with me? Okay. Are you with me? So everybody, does that make sense? Okay. It'll stimulate different creation of those proteins within that nucleus. Can everybody sort of get on board with that? Does anything with that not make sense? Okay. So the big question is, where are they going, right? And we're going to walk through each one of those in just a second. Okay. The specific receptors for specific hormones, we get that. Okay. So our body, you understand, is constantly monitoring our status, right? Heart rate, blood sugar levels, reproductive, right? We get a good grasp of that. And with the endocrine system, there's different ways that these endocrine organs monitor the status of our bodies, okay? Humoral. They used to call blood humors, right? Or the fluids in our body humors, right? And there's different words as well, okay? So the humor will control hormonal release is regulating the levels of different hormones in our blood. Or substances like glucose, okay? And we'll get into which is which in just a little bit, okay? So your body is constantly monitoring the level of substances in the blood. Whether it be hormones, whether it be glucose, which is obviously not a hormone, levels of sodium, levels of potassium, And different hormones can kick in if it gets out of what? Out of the blank range. Normal range, right? If you look at the range of our physiology, it's like amazing we're alive, really. You know, it's got to be this, you know, pH, it's got to be this amount of solute, it's got to be this amount of, you know, warmth, pressure, everything. It's pretty amazing. So our body's going to monitor the blood to see if anything needs to be modified or changed. We can have a nerve response. So a perfect example of a hormonal release with a nerve response is the sympathetic nervous system. Sympathetic nervous system is your, what do we call that? Fight or flight. If a bear knocked on the door and opened it and came in, right? Your fight or flight would kick in. You have nerves that go to the gland that store epinephrine and norepinephrine. They get triggered, you release it, and norepinephrine and epinephrine is also known as adrenaline and noradrenaline. Holy crapola, right? There's a bear in the room, I'm getting ready to fight or flight, right? And then that prepares your body in many ways to take fight or flight, okay? So nerves. And then hormonal, this is where it kind of gets a little wonky, okay? Hormonal is when one gland releases what's called a releasing hormone to another gland, then that gland will release the hormone, okay? We're gonna walk right through that step in a little bit, okay? I'll show you gland by gland. So, we're monitoring levels of substances in our blood. We have nerve control, where we can trigger, say, fight or flight. And then we just have a regular regulation of hormones between one gland saying, how's the status of things? Not so good? Okay, thyroid, you're gonna release more hormone, or, you know, release more sperm or release more eggs, okay? There's a master gland. All right, does that sort of make sense? Okay, all right. We look at, hold on a second, back up. I usually look at all these. Let's look at this picture. Just to get an overview of where they are, we will also look for them in lab. You need a laser pointer. All right, I guess finger will do. Okay, so your hypothalamus is going to be like that major controller, okay? Hypo means what? Below. Thalamus means thalamus, okay? It's a little gland that sits underneath your thalamus in your brain, and it helps to orchestrate multiple hormones in the body. I'm going to give you a mnemonic in lab, which is helpful. It's called flat peg, okay? But we'll get to that in lab, okay? The hypothalamus will talk to the pituitary gland, okay? That's actually where your flat peg is going to be, I'm sorry, okay? So the hypothalamus is connected by a stalk to the pituitary. The hypothalamus is driving the train, telling the pituitary what to do. Are you with me? Okay? And the pituitary has different parts and multiple hormones, which we'll learn, that regulate almost all the functions of our body. Okay? So hypothalamus talks to who? Pituitary. They're connected by what's called the infundibulum. Isn't that fun? Infundibulum. Okay? Hypothalamus will tell the pituitary what's happening today. Are you with me? Okay? At that point, the pituitary is surrounded by capillaries that sends the hormones out into the body. They'll go to their receptors and do what they're meant to do. Okay? Now, pineal gland is in the back. It's called the third eye. It's almost like a third little eye back there. This is all in the notes, so just listen and look, okay? It's all in the notes. Pineal gland releases melatonin. Melatonin regulates what? Sleep-wake cycles. Thyroid is this butterfly shape in the front of the throat. It regulates metabolism. Behind it are parathyroid glands, which release parathyroid hormone or parathyroid. Okay? And that helps to regulate bone density, right? Removes it if we need it in the bloodstream. Thymus gland is behind the breastbone. It helps with your T cells, and your T cells regulate your immunity. Okay, T cells, B cells. All right, above the kidneys, there's this little, I call it Napoleon hat, okay, that's your suprarenal gland. That releases epinephrine, norepinephrine, and also hormones that regulate the levels of sodium and potassium and sugars in our body. Okay? Pancreas helps to do what? Regulate what in our bloodstream? Glucose, okay, in our bloodstream. And we'll go over all the steps of what that does. Does anybody know what else the pancreas does? Actually, the majority of the gland does this. Pancreas is endocrine, regulates glucose levels. It's also exocrine. It secretes substances to a duct. Do you know what those substances help to do? Did you say digestion? You are correct, digestion. It releases enzymes that helps to break down our foodstuffs. It's actually one of the main contributors to that. The reason that is important clinically is if people have a mucus producing disease, such as cystic fibrosis, it'll block that duct. They can't get the enzymes out, and they get very, very thin. They have to ingest digestive enzymes. 2, if you break the capsule around the pancreas, such as in, what would break that capsule around the pancreas? If we have what? It's the big C word. Cancer. If you break that capsule with cancer, if it breaks through that, what's going to happen to the digestive enzymes that are being created within the pancreas? They leak out into the tissues. Have you known anybody with pancreatic cancer? It's like a death notice. It's a very serious, serious cancer because of that. And then because those enzymes are released, the cancer can spread more readily because it's eating through the tissues. Okay? Awful, awful disease. Okay, I digress. Ovaries obviously will make oocytes or eggs. To keep it simple, testes will make sperm. We'll get a little into that. I don't get a ton into that because we have reproductive coming up at the end of the semester that we'll go into it in depth. Okay? But having a good overview of where they are visually, I think, is good for you to keep in mind as you're learning it. All right, back to the notes. Okay, so can you close your eyes and picture where I pointed out the pituitary gland? Right? Sorry, I'm just looking at something really quick. Okay, so so pituitary gland. I wonder why. Sorry, I'm having a moment here. Having an elderly moment. Oh, I just go over it that way. Okay. So, pituitary. The pituitary, if you don't remember this, get the skulls out when you go into lab. There's something called the sella turcica. It means Turkish saddle. In the center of the sphenoid bone, in the base of the skull. Okay? That is where the pituitary sits. Just above it is the what? Hypothalamus. The hypothalamus will either release releasing hormones or inhibiting hormones down to the pituitary to either do what? That's your question. release or inhibit those hormones in the pituitary. It's as simple as that. Thank God. Okay? Are you with me? So it's a very important connection between those two. They are connected by the infundibulum, which is a little stalk of tissue. Okay? So hypothalamus, infundibulum, pituitary. Got it? Okay? So we have posterior pituitary and anterior pituitary. Big difference. Okay, there's a big difference. The posterior pituitary is basically nerve fibers. Okay? The posterior pituitary does not make its own hormones. And we'll talk about the hormones that it stores in the future. Okay? Posterior pituitary does not make its own hormones. It actually takes hormones from the hypothalamus and stores them. I don't have them up there. Do I? Oh, I do. Oxytocin and ADH. Okay? So oxytocin and ADH will be released from the hypothalamus, travel down to the posterior pituitary, which is made up mostly of nerve fibers. This is where endocrine starts to get confusing, guys, because it's just point and shoot. This does this and sends it to this, and this does this and sends it to this. So this is when you're going to really have to sit down and start repeating these things over and over to yourself. Okay? Okay. So the anterior pituitary is made up of glandular tissue. I'll give you candy next week when we meet if anyone can tell me what glandular tissue is made up of. No? Yay! You can come in, I'll give you chocolate in the lab review. Is it in the notes?
I just watched the video.
Oh, you're right ahead. Good. Rewatch ahead. Good. Epithelium. Who knows what epithelium is, though? Closely packed cells. Very good. Okay. When we studied tissues way back when, right? Okay. And we talk about epithelium. Epithelium in general is closely packed cells. Epithelium has two major groupings. Covering and lining. All the surfaces of the body are covered in different types of epithelium, which are what again? Closely packed cells. Thank you very much. Why is it important to understand that the surfaces of our body are covered with epithelium? This is where what begins quite often. No guesses? This is where diseases begin. The cells don't reproduce properly and or get damaged, and this is where pathologies start to happen. Are you with me? Okay, so closely packed cells. So we have covering and lining, just a brief review, but we also have what's called glandular epithelium. In these glands that we're studying, we have closely packed cells that release specific hormones that go into the bloodstream to their target organs. Okay? Anterior pituitary is glandular epithelium. It is closely packed cells. Within that connection, or collection I should say, of closely packed cells, you have specific cells that will release specific hormones. Are you with me? But there's a whole bunch of them in there. So we have a cluster of one type of cell groupings, and then another cluster, and then another cluster, and then another cluster that'll release specific hormones out into the bloodstream. Are you with me? Okay? Okay, so anterior pituitary, many hormones. All right? Any questions on that? Do you sort of kind of get it? Okay. So pituitary, also known as hypophysis. I'm going to call it anterior and posterior pituitary, or pituitary in general. Here's some of the target organs. I don't love this picture, but if this helps you, go for it. Let me see if, the only thing I really like is this part here, if you can see it. So the hypothalamus, the hypothalamus, guys, is not like, bam, this like obvious structure when you open up the brain. It's just an area in the brain. And if you were to look at it microscopically, you could see specific collections of cells. But if you look at it in the brain, it just looks like a little white area, okay? So hypothalamus connects by the what? Infundibulum, isn't that fun? Infundibulum down to the pituitary. The front part here is the anterior pituitary, the back part of the posterior pituitary. Anterior pituitary is full of what again? Cells or glandular epithelium. Posterior pituitary is full of nerves and stored hormones from the hypothalamus, whoever said that. Okay? Are we good? Does that make sense? Can you picture that before we move on? Okay, great. I have a mnemonic you'll learn in your lab book for these, but let's just go over them in general. Okay, the hypothalamus is going to talk to the anterior pituitary. At that point, the anterior pituitary can release all these different hormones. We're going to go through them one by one. Okay? Yeah, we'll go through them one by one. Growth hormone makes you what? Grow, right? It's at high levels when you were younger, or I should say at higher levels when you are younger. And guess what people have started doing? Creating a chemically derived growth hormone to do what? Build muscle. The only thing is I believe that there's some cancer side effects to that. There's a reason our body stops making high levels of growth hormone, okay? So the main thing it targets are bone and skeletal muscles, okay? Promotes protein synthesis and use of fats for fuel. So if you're using fats for fuel, you're tapping into your fat stores, right? And you're losing fat. This is why people like to supplement with this, okay? Stimulated by growth hormone releasing hormone released from the hypothalamus, inhibited by growth hormone inhibiting hormone. It can be inhibited by other things. This is what I will ask you. I think that makes sense, right? We can figure that one out. Okay, so that one's pretty simple. Thyroid stimulating hormone is going to stimulate the thyroid, which will increase metabolism. And I don't think I get into it on this slide, probably the next slide or two. Okay, will increase metabolism. Okay. Thyroid, so TSH is thyroid stimulating hormone, stimulates the thyroid. So thyrotropin releasing hormone from the hypothalamus releases to the anterior pituitary. The anterior pituitary then releases thyroid stimulating hormone, which will go to the thyroid. Okay, does that make sense? So thyrotropin releasing hormone will come from the hypothalamus. It goes to the pituitary through the infundibulum, right? And then the anterior pituitary will release thyroid stimulating hormone. Yes, which will go to the thyroid. Yes, does that make sense? I know, it's like, oh. It can be inhibited by growth hormone inhibiting hormone. So this one doesn't quite make sense, but you know, it's pretty close. Okay? Yes, no? Okay. Let me just see one other thing. Yeah, good. Okay, that's what I thought. I go more into thyroid hormone in the future. Okay. So I see people glazing over. I know, guys, there's like no other way to get through this than just getting through it, okay, and going through the names. So we'll take a break once we get through these anterior. You can get some caffeine or a Red Bull or whatever, okay? Shouldn't drink Red Bull, it's not good for you. Adrenal corticotropic hormone. Okay, so there is on top of the kidney what's called the suprarenal glands, okay? And in that, or the adrenal glands. So suprarenal or adrenal glands, okay? If we were, they look like those little triangles. Remember we looked at them on top of the kidney, and that's not quite how they look like in a human. They actually look like a little fat pad in a human, but that's how they always depict it. If you were to take one of those triangles, or adrenal glands, or suprarenal glands, wrong way. Okay, it is definitely not this triangular, okay? The outside is the cortex, okay? So if you were to cut it right in half and look inside, the outer rim is the cortex. The inner side, does anybody know what this inner portion is called? Very nice, medulla, okay? So there's adrenal cortex and there's adrenal medulla. Okay. We're going to get into specifics, but the cortex helps us to deal with stress responses. Okay. So does the inside, but in a different way. So ACT, everybody calls it ACTH. Okay, is going to be released from the anterior pituitary. It's stimulated to be released from the anterior pituitary by the hypothalamus releasing corticotropin releasing hormone. Okay, so hypothalamus releases corticotropin releasing hormone to the anterior. Here's the hint, guys. Here's the hint. Here's a secret. Am I ever going to ask you to spell it? Well, ACTH I will in lab, but that's in lab. In lecture, don't let these words freak you out. Get a gist of the word, cortical, done, right? Cortical, done, right? Try to affiliate the words with where they're coming from. Okay, I see everybody's starting to go, like deer in a headlight kind of thing. Get a general gist of the word, where it's coming from, right? Where it's going to, and you'll be fine. Okay, so corticotropin releasing cortex, done. Okay, from the hypothalamus to the anterior pituitary, it releases ACTH. Okay, that'll go to the cortex of the suprarenal gland. Okay, that'll release specific hormones that help with their stress response. Are you with me? Yeah? Okay. Gonadotropins. Okay, gonadotropin releasing hormone, good. Okay, it's turned off when we have adequate levels. I don't go over that, but if you're curious. We have follicle stimulating hormone, which is going to help the creation of egg and sperm, okay, and the release of it. Luteinizing hormone helps to regulate the levels of testosterone, estrogen, progesterone. Luteinizing hormone. So we have two hormones which are going to go to the gonads. Okay. Gonadotropins. Prolactin, prolactation helps to stimulate milk production. This would obviously be in a female who has a baby. Okay. It can be released in cases of cancer. There's been times where there's been cancers in that anterior pituitary, which stimulates the release of prolactin, even in males. So if there's any leakage from the nipple in male or female when you are not lactating with, having had a child, that is a bad sign. You need to go get checked. Okay? So prolactin stimulates milk production, may help a little bit with testosterone in males. That's not the main driver. Okay? Prolactin releasing hormone and prolactin inhibiting hormone. Good. I'm not going to get too nuts with those inhibiting and releasing hormones. But they should make sense, right? Posterior pituitary is going to release, we'll take a break after this slide, two hormones. Does it create these hormones? Who creates the hormones? Hypothalamus, very nice. It travels down to the posterior pituitary, which is made up of what type of tissue? Posterior pituitary is made up of what? No, nerve. Posterior pituitary is nerve. That's great to remember something though. Anterior pituitary is epithelium, glandular epithelium, okay? Anti-diuresis, it prevents urination. Why would we want to prevent urination?
So you're not peeing all the time?
So you're not peeing all the time, unless you're a 45-year-old woman. It all changes, ladies. I don't know what guys turn, but body wears out. What can you do? Okay? Anti-diuresis. But another reason you don't want to pee all the time is you want to do what? Not hormones. You want to keep nutrients. It only releases water. It only changes the release or retention of water. Yeah, so you don't get dehydrated. Once you start, your body senses to start that you're dehydrated, okay? You will release antidiuretic hormone, which will stop diuresis, retain fluid from the kidneys, okay? And put it back into your system. Remember that our bodies want to be isotonic. What does that mean? Certain percentage of solutes in our fluids, right? If we get too much sodium, that's bad. If we get too little sodium, that's bad. Too much potassium, etc. You want to have a solution that is isotonic or similar to your own body tissue fluids, okay? This helps when we start to get too dehydrated. The other thing to keep in mind, and this is important clinical stuff, is within the cardiovascular circuit, you need a certain amount of pressure. Okay, so you can imagine your heart and your blood vessels, right? Those blood vessels are pushing fluid out into your tissues, yeah? Okay, what happens if you lose a ton of fluid and that pressure in the cardiovascular circuit drops? Can you perfuse your tissues with fresh nutrients and fluids? Okay, perfusion is an important concept that we should talk about briefly. P-E-R, hint, hint, F-U-S-I-O-N is the ability to push fluids out into the tissues or through the kidney or into the brain, right? If you decrease the amount of fluid within your body, you can't perfuse your tissues, right? Probably learned about this in clinical already, haven't you? Are you doing clinical? You are doing clinical, aren't you? Yeah. Right? Okay. My grandmother, just divulged patient information and now it's on tape, but anyway, somebody's grandmother somewhere at some point had a duodenal bleed, which I know is not dealing with anything with urination, but this is good clinical stuff, okay? Had a duodenal bleed. Okay, we should have about 5 to 10 liters of blood depending on our size. She was small. So let's say she was supposed to have 7 or 8 liters of blood. She was down by half. Okay? She went into, what do you go into if you lose that much fluid and you're not perfusing your tissues? Go into shock, right? Your systems start to shut down because you can't provide fluids. Okay? Antidiuretic hormone also helps to prevent this decrease of fluids so we have enough to perfuse our tissues so we don't go into shock. Bread and butter stuff, kids, write it down. Okay? From my mouth to your ears. All right? Oxytocin. They also call this the cuddle hormone. Okay? We'll talk about that reproductive. Okay. But oxytocin helps with the contraction of smooth muscle, especially uterus and breast, when a woman is what? Pregnant and more specifically ready to deliver, right? Oxytocin helps the perpetuation of uterine contractions. It does other things as well, okay? Helps prepare the breast for lactation as well, all right? We good with that? Where is that created though? Hypothalamus. Where is it stored? Posterior pituitary, those two. All right, we good? All right, let's take a 5-minute break. Shake it out, get some caffeine. So, delving a little bit more into these glands, okay? Thyroid gland is going to be on the front part of the throat in front of that thyroid cartilage that we spoke about way back in respiratory. All right, it's like a butterfly shape. All right. There are two. Picture of it, I know, like previously, but you know it's butterfly shaped, right? And it's got a right lobe and a left lobe, and it's connected by what's called the isthmus, which you'll learn about in ISTHMUS. If you can't see that, you'll learn about that in lab. Okay, so a right lobe, left lobe, and an isthmus, or the connection between. And if we were to cut it apart and look inside, there's cells, and there's also something called colloid, which we'll look at in lab, okay? But let's worry about the microscopic stuff in lab. Okay, so right and left lobe, and the isthmus connecting it in the center, okay? On that front part of the trachea. Now, on the back of it, so if we're talking about my thyroid right now and I were to tuck my fingers behind it, I could like dissect into myself, right? There's 4 to 6 little pea-shaped glands called parathyroid glands. They have nothing to do with what we're going to talk about right now. They're just a completely different structure. Much like the adrenal glands are on top of the kidney, they're not part of the kidney. They just happen to be there, okay? So even though these are called parathyroid, nothing to do with these functions. They have their own separate function, which we'll talk about, okay? Well, we already know it releases parathyroid hormone. And what does parathyroid hormone do? Breaks down bone to get calcium out into the bloodstream. And also to help allow bone to regenerate itself, okay? Now, thyroid hormone, through a very complex series of steps, takes a protein or an amino acid called tyrosine, combines it with iodine, and where do we find iodine? Salt, right? We have supplemental salt that has iodine in it. And with the iodine and the tyrosine, it goes into, God bless you, the subunits and cells of the thyroid to create what's called T3 and T4, okay? Thyroxine and triiodothyronine. I don't make you spell them because I'll be honest with you, I can't remember them. Maybe it's just a brain fart that I have. So as long as you know T3 and T4, I'm fine with that. I relearn it every year and I forget it every year. It's one of those things, okay? You're always going to hear it as T3 and T4 anyway. T3 is going to be the metabolically active form of these two. T4 is also created in the thyroid, but when it gets out into our tissues, it turns into T3 anyway. Okay, so T3 is like the winner, okay? It's like 3 to 4 times more active in increasing our metabolism than T4. Okay? Are you with me? Okay. Increases basal metabolic rate. Well, great, but what does that mean? Okay, what does that mean? It means we create more heat. It means we have more free forms of energy in glucose to be used. Okay, we'll break down fats if need be to create energy. Okay, it'll increase all those processes. So if we have low levels of T3, what would some of the things be that we would feel? We would feel what? Fatigued, cold, right? Probably gain weight. If somebody has a real active thyroid, they'd probably be really what? Skinny. Okay? All right, so it helps to monitor and regulate that basal metabolic rate. So that's basal metabolic rate really is your resting, as you're sitting and not doing anything, your resting rate. That's outside. Okay. I thought it was an alarm for a second. I think it's one of the workers. Okay? Imbalances in the thyroid get really kind of tricky, and the best way to test this obviously would be blood levels, right, of the hormones, right? But just some names that you should put into your noggin to know in the future is myxedema is hypothyroid, all those symptoms that we talked about, okay? And some people just have an underactive thyroid. They can be given hormones to supplement that. But more importantly, some people can have diseases which destroy the functioning of the thyroid. And they're given a medicine called Synthroid, which can help to reactivate their thyroid gland for them. Okay? Endemic goiter. We don't really see this anymore. Does anybody know what this is? Endemic goiter? This used to happen. No?
It's like right here, isn't it?
Yeah,
Like
goiter is this picture of this little boy, I don't know if you can see it very well, where they get an expansion of their thyroid because they don't have enough iodine, right? Remember I told you tyrosine and iodine combine to form T3 and T4? Well, what happens if you don't have iodine, your thyroid keeps working and working and working and working to create it, and it creates the precursor to it and stores it in the thyroid. So that makes the thyroid swell up like that. Okay, you could get a goiter actually from hyperthyroid as well, but this is why we get endemic goiter. And we don't see this because we put iodine into our salt to supplement people's diets, okay? Graves' disease is hyperthyroidism. Quite often this will be an autoimmune issue, where for some reason that we're not quite clear, our own cells start to attack the thyroid and make it overactive, okay? So you get a constant release of thyroid hormone due to your own body's attacking of that thyroid. Okay, you can actually get a swelling of the thyroid because it's working so hard. Okay, you could also get what they used to call. I was just trying to look up the word online. They don't call it. It used to be called exophthalmos. That protrusion. I think they're calling it proptosis now. But don't worry about the name. Is my point. Where people's eyes protrude forward. For some reason with Graves' disease, they get fat deposited behind their eyeballs, which pushes them forward. So you're able to see more of the weight of the eye on the top, okay? I think that's why they're calling it proptosis, because ptosis is the dropping of the eyelid. I think proptosis is probably the lifting of it, is my guess, okay? And the eyes are pushed forward, okay? Right. Any questions about that? I'm going to throw you guys for a loop. If you have a problem in your thyroid, it could start where? What'd you say? Yes. We'll give you chocolate on Thursday when you come into lab. That's my whole point. That's why endocrine is so confusing. Because these talk about issues that are in the thyroid themselves, but you could also have some sort of tumor that's either in the hypothalamus or the anterior pituitary. Because the anterior pituitary is made up of cells, we can get cancerous lesions in that area. Okay, so clinical bread and butter, you ready? Okay, if you have strange symptoms, difficulty growing, overgrowing, sexual responses, lack of growth of sexual organs. See where I'm going? Problems regulating potassium and sodium. You've got all these crazy symptoms. Where do you go? Endocrinologist. Probably going to be your anterior pituitary is probably not going to be good news. This happened to my uncle. He had these really crazy symptoms that we all thought, oh, you know, just divulged it again. Sorry. Somebody's uncle that I knew at some point, right? Don't throw me under the bus, you know. Okay. So somebody's uncle, it wasn't my uncle, right? Like, you know, this problem, that problem, this problem, and I'm like, it's hypothalamus. And they got the report back that he actually had a brain tumor in his hypothalamus. So, you see what I'm saying, guys? Bread and butter stuff. You see these really weird divergent symptoms. You want to think back to endocrine. Okay? All right. So, I digress. Your book now says that this hormone, which is released actually from the thyroid, and we'll look at the cells that release this when we go into the lab, doesn't put calcium into the bone anymore. Okay? Calcitonin is the hormone. And so these are what, we'll learn this in lab, so you don't need to learn it, what are called parafollicular cells. The reason I want you to write it down is because you know where they are yet. Okay, we'll go over this in lab, microscopically. But calcitonin is released from the thyroid. They used to say that that is what deposited calcium into bone. Now they're saying it's not. So I won't ask you about it, but I wouldn't negate it, because if you follow, who follows research? Nobody? All right. One thing will be published, aha, the beacon, it's the light, it's brilliant, and then the next week what happens? Nah, aha, right? And they'll look at this. I mean, it gets a little crazy with the research where they find new stuff all the time. Who knows what'll happen if this starts to come back or not? We'll see. Okay, parathyroid glands, we talked about this. Posterior to the thyroid releases parathyroid hormone, which releases calcium from the bone to the blood. Again, moving on. Any questions? Good. Okay, so adrenal glands, also known as suprarenal, found above the what? Are they part of the kidneys? No. Completely separate unit. As I said to you, if you look directly above the kidneys, it doesn't look like these perfect little triangles. It looks almost just like a fat pad. Okay? And the kidney is actually surrounded by fat anyway, because fat is part of what holds them up. Okay? Because the kidneys connect to ureters, we're going to find the ureters have to be kept straight, right? So if we drop them down, they won't be straight. So kidneys have fat around them anyway, but this little pad on top is actually the adrenal gland, also known as suprarenal gland. Are you with me? Okay. Adrenal medulla we talked about. That actually has a direct connection by nerves into the sympathetic nervous system. The adrenal medulla is going to release epinephrine and norepinephrine. Hold on a second. I think I go into it. I do. Okay? It's right in the notes. We're going to go through it. Okay, so inner portion. Cortex always means the outside. Okay? The adrenal cortex is that outer portion. It releases hormones which will aid with stress. Okay, so let's go through those hormones from the adrenal glands. Now, if we look at, I'm not going to kill you with questions, but you should be familiar with this. At the adrenal cortex, so here's that little triangular, this would be the what? Cortex, this would be the medulla. So I'm taking this little section here, well I'm not, they did, I can never draw this, and blow it up. Do you get where I'm going here? So we're going to look at the cells of the cortex and the cells of the adrenal medulla. Okay, so the cells of the adrenal medulla are called chromaffin cells. We don't need to get into that. Just know those cells of the adrenal medulla. And what do they release again? Epinephrine and norepinephrine, also known as adrenaline and noradrenaline. Those will be stimulated with our stress response to release those hormones in times of stress. Okay? Does that make sense? That's pretty easy peasy. Now, the cortex is connected, or not connected, divided into zones, or zonas. Zona glomerulosa, fasciculata, and reticularis. Why do we have three different names to these layers? Two main things. They're composed of different tissue or cells, and they release different hormones. Okay, are you with me? I have all that on the next page. Okay, so glomerulosa, fasciculata, reticularis. I never thought of this before. Like, did you ever hear glomerular filtration rate? Probably.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, GFR. You remember? I don't know. To remember the order of those, GFR. Okay. Just thought of me. Anyway, if you don't know what that is, don't worry about it. We'll get into the future. Okay, so let's look at these layers and what they do. Zona glomerulosa, these notes are a little confusing. I'm going to have to go through and redo these eventually. is going to primarily release aldosterone. Okay, so you might want to just sort of rewrite these notes a little bit. Zona glomerulosa is going to release mostly, if not all, aldosterone. Are you with me? So glomerulosa, aldosterone. Aldosterone's function is to control mineralocorticoids and electrolyte concentration. Well, actually, I shouldn't say that. Aldosterone is a mineralocorticoid, okay? So aldosterone is a mineralocorticoid, and the mineralocorticoid's functions are to regulate electrolytes, okay? So aldosterone is a mineralocorticoid. Sorry to say it over and over again. Okay. Those regulate electrolytes. Okay. Sodium, potassium, primarily. Okay. God bless you. In times of stress, we retain sodium. Where sodium goes, what goes? Water goes. Right? We retain sodium in fluids, so that way our body is preparing to run, to use it, to store fluids, right? We're not going to get rid of fluids if we're going into a stressful period. We're going to retain them. Are you with me? Okay? Yes, no? Okay. Any questions on that one? Moving in. Zona vesiculata is going to release glucocorticoids, okay? The main glucocorticoid, guys, add this, is cortisol. Cortisol. Cortisol frees up glucose to put into our bloodstream in many ways. Okay? And why do we want to put glucose into our bloodstream in times of stress?
For energy.
Yeah, for energy, right? If you know you're going into the ring to fight a bear, right? You're going to want as much energy as possible, okay? All right, so fasciculata has your glucocorticoids. Your primary glucocorticoid is going to be what? Cortisol, all right? Okay. That balances and releases sugars from our stored liver, you know, gets muscles ready to use glucose. Okay. Does that make sense? Are we good with that? Excellent. Okay. Zona, God bless you. Zona reticularis is going to release a group of hormones called gonadotropins, specifically androgens. Okay? Androgens are a very small contributor that are like the precursor to testosterone and estrogen. Okay? There's some thought that this helps boys during puberty and it helps females during menopause. Okay? But I mean, it's a small portion of the regulation of those hormones, of those sex hormones. Okay? Are we good with those three? Kind of weird. I have no idea when you're dealing with a stress organ why it would be thrown in there, but it is. Okay? Adrenal cortex, 3 layers, what they release, what those basic functions are. Are we clear with those? Are we good? Okay? All right. There's a disease called Cushing's disease, which is an excessive release of those glucocorticoids, which would be especially cortisol, and they get a very round face. If you release cortisol in short spurts, it gives you energy. If you release it frequently, all those free fats in your body those free sugars in your body get converted to fat. The fat will deposit in the face and create that round moon-like, they call it a moon facies, or they used to, and something called a buffalo hump, where you get a fat pad for some reason right about the bottom of your cervical upper thoracic spine, okay? So Cushing's disease. It's usually an autoimmune issue where their adrenal cortex can't regulate the release of those hormones well, okay? Then they end up releasing excess cortisol. Any questions on that? Adrenal medulla, good. All right, I think we're good with that. Epinephrine is going to be 80%. Epinephrine helps to stimulate the nerves, you know, with that sympathetic response. All right. Pancreas. We might not quite know this yet. All right. Super important. How many people are you going to be dealing with who have pancreas problems when you're out in the clinical field? Yeah, tons. Tons. And tons. And the thing to keep in mind, we're going to talk about diabetes as well. Probably not today. We'll see. Probably not today. So if you're diabetic, you have excess levels of what in your bloodstream? Glucose, okay, right? Right? Okay. Do you think glucose or sugars are a good breeding ground for bacteria and viruses? Oh yeah, right? So people with diabetes tend to have a lot of what? Infections. Okay. What sugar also does is it causes and promotes inflammation in our bodies. Inflammation is the primary destroyer to the inner lining of blood vessels. Okay, so what does that do for diabetics?
Longer healing process.
Longer, I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
It's a longer healing process.
Yeah, longer healing process because you're doing what to your blood vessels? You're basically damaging them. So not only is it a longer healing process, what happens with those patients? I love it when people are in clinical because I can draw it in. What happens to the fingers and toes, most likely toes of diabetics? You lose them, right? Especially if you fiddle with, you've really got to be fastidious if you have problems with sugar because infections start because bacteria and viruses love the extra sugar. That was a weird face I just made. And also that sugar creates inflammation in the blood vessels, which damages them, right? And you can't get fresh nutrients out to your tissues, right? And you can eventually lose them. So, nasty stuff. So let's talk about the pancreas. So, we have exocrine and endocrine. Endocrine will regulate what? Endocrine helps to regulate what in the bloodstream? The endocrine portion. Glucose. Your endocrine portion is what will regulate blood levels of dextrose or glucose. The exocrine portion is what helps with digesting food. Just to get those two things into your head. Okay. Exocrine portion is made for digestion. It's made of what are called acinar cells. We'll look at pictures. It's kind of hard to see on this picture. We'll look at it in lab. We have islets of Langerhans that we'll look at, which are these conglomeration of cells that create, you can't see it really well on here, a different staining area on this slide, but surrounding it, we almost have these little round groupings of cells. Those are called acinar cells. The acinar cells are the cells that store and release the digestive enzymes that we use to break down our foodstuffs. Okay? The endocrine portion is the pancreatic islets, also known as islets of Langerhans, because guess who found them? Dr. Langerhans. We're not allowed to name things after ourselves anymore. Not that I would ever, but in those pancreatic, they're little, like, it looks like islands of cells in the pancreas. But here's the thing, guys, it's only like 1 to 2% of your pancreas. Okay, the huge portion is going to break down digestive enzymes. Is one more important than the other? No, but I really want you to understand both functions. All right? In the islets of Langerhans, we're going to have alpha cells and beta cells. You do not need to tell me the difference when you're looking at the islets of Langerhans. When you're looking at it microscopically, you just need to know islets of Langerhans and Acinar cells. But realize in here, there's even more cells. There's alpha cells and there's beta cells. Now, alpha cells release glucagon. I always remember that because A and A. Okay? Alpha cells release glucagon, beta cells release insulin. Okay? Glucose is too big to get into our cells. Do you understand what we're doing with glucose? What is our main goal with glucose? What? ATP, okay. So we're gonna create, do we remember what ATP is?
Your energy.
There's little energy packets, okay? So in order to create energy, we have to have, or the best way to create energy, we have to have glucose, okay? Can we just keep glucose in the bloodstream and it'll create energy for us? No. We have to put it into the bloodstream and it has to go where? Just in general. It goes everywhere, but it's gotta go, I'm a cell, right? I need what? To create energy. Glucose. Are you with me? We have to take the glucose and put it into the cells in order to create energy. Best case scenario, we take glucose and what? What's the other thing that we need? Oxygen. Put them into the cells and we can create the most amount of energy. Are you with me? Matter of fact, when I had my second child, I have 2 stepchildren who I call my kids. So if you hear me say 4, okay, I have 2, then I have 2 biological kids. My last one, this is why I didn't have a 5th. I was gonna have a 5th one, but I was like, no way. He didn't sleep for 2 years. The first year of his life, he was up 5 times a night. I almost lost my mind. And I would pick the best student and I would say, hey, Esther, if I say something really stupid, because I only slept 2 hours last night, just be like, hey, Dr. D, did you mean blah, blah, blah? And I was so tired, I would literally eat a power bar and sit and rock and give him a bottle and think, okay, I gotta get some kind of energy here, because I have glucose and I have oxygen and they'll combine in my cells and I'll be able to make energy. That's what tired it was. Awful. But anyway, he's a total sweetheart now. He's worth every second. But anyway, okay, so glucose and oxygen. We bring them in, they've got to go into the cells to create the best form of energy possible. Here's the thing. Glucose has to be put into the cells with insulin. Okay? Insulin takes glucose, goes to specific receptors to get the glucose into the cell. If we don't have insulin, can the glucose go into the cells? No. Can you picture that in your head? Here's the other problem. This happens with type 2. That efficiency of taking insulin and glucose doesn't work as well getting it into the cells. So we could either not have insulin or decrease effectiveness of the insulin getting glucose into the cells. Are you with me? Okay, that's bread and butter stuff, guys. I would definitely put that into your negative knowledge, okay? Now, there's gonna be times where we don't have enough glucose from what we've eaten, right? And we have to go into stored forms. Oh, okay, good. Okay, we have to go into stored forms. How do we store glucose? Who's the primary storer of glucose? Begins with an L. Liver. Okay, there's other ways we could tap into it. If we get low levels of glucose in our bloodstream because we haven't eaten enough, we'll go into stored forms. We'll go into the liver where glucose is stored as what? Glycogen. Glucagon is the hormone that helps to release it. Okay, so we have glycogen in our liver, which is stored glucose. Our body senses we don't have enough sugar, it releases glucagon, it releases the stored forms of glucose from the what? Liver. If that's not enough, glucagon can also tap into our fat reserves and use fat as energy. Here's the thing, we're going to learn this in metabolism. Glucose and oxygen best way to get energy. Okay? Fat, second form of energy. Is it great? Not so great, about half as much. But beggars can't be choosers, right? So glucagon, if we don't have enough stored glycogen, will also tap into fat. Are you with me? For energy, it's about half as much energy as it would be with glucose. Are you following me? Are we good with that? Does that make sense? Any questions? Okay. All right, so exocrine, endocrine portions, exocrine digestion, endocrine regulation of glucose. Okay? So, diabetes, I have a whole separate lecture put together. I think I do it during metabolism. Maybe I do it during this week, I forget. But, because this will be, you will see so many people with diabetes. It's good for you to understand diabetes. I'll go into the different forms and what they mean and whatnot in the future. Just in general, diabetes mellitus, there's mellitus because there's actually an insipidus, which I don't know if you would get that or not. But I think I go into that in the diabetes lecture as well. Insulin is not being secreted. Make a note here. Insulin is not being secreted or used efficiently. Because in type 2 diabetes, we're getting insulin, it's just not being used efficiently. Okay? 3 signs: polyuria, polydipsia, polyphagia. Okay? So they're peeing a lot, they're very thirsty, they're very hungry. Why? They have sugar, but it's not what? Not being absorbed. Just floating around in the bloodstream. Who cares? Who cares if it's in the bloodstream? Well, but anyway, right? It's not being absorbed, so basically they're starving. I knew somebody who was a type 1 diabetic, I remember not to say who it was this time, right? And they were starving and thirsty all the time because the sugar wasn't being absorbed into their cells, so the body thought it needed more sugar, right? And because of the high levels of sugar, the body wanted more water to thin out that solute, are you with me, and create a more isotonic solution, and she kept peeing and peeing and peeing, okay? So those are the 3 signs of diabetes mellitus. More in the future, okay? Male and female hormones, okay? Ovaries produce estrogen, and we have progesterone as well. I'm really just going to bust through this because we completely go over this in reproductive, and I think we're almost done, right? Which will mean that I get this done on time. Testes create testosterone in the scrotum. We'll look at this in lab where they're created when we get to that. Okay, produces sperm and male sex hormones, more in the future. All right, pineal gland, perfect. Pineal gland is like one of my favorite little structures. It's this little peanut kind of, or pine nut structure in the back of the brain. It releases melatonin. Melatonin helps us with our sleep-wake cycles. There's also some anti-cancer benefits to it. If you are going to work at night, you should look into supplementing with melatonin. You release high levels of it when you sleep in the evening. If you're not sleeping in the evening, because I know some of you might go on a swing shift, you should take it during the day so you're getting sufficient amounts of melatonin, because it does have anti-cancer benefits to it. Okay, just a little side note. Can't really give you medical advice, but you know what I mean. So it sets the biological clock. It will peak in the evening when we should sleep, okay? And then when it's time to wake up, we will have a peak of epinephrine and norepinephrine, which helps us to, and cortisol, which helps us to wake up in the morning, and melatonin will decrease. Okay, so pretty neat little function there. Okay, the thymus is deep to the sternum. It's almost like, once again, like it looks like a little fatty pad. It's not. But it helps to release, cells that help with the immune response. Okay. Yeah, that's as far as I go with that. All right. All right. Any questions with that? Excellent. All right. I will see you all next Monday. And if you have any questions, of course, come see me. And don't forget lab review this Thursday. All right. Thank you, guys.